We're about time to start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome everyone to today's quantitative history lecture series. And I'm Sijie, and I'm currently visiting at the IHSS here at HKU. I'm very honored to be the chair for today's session. So today we are very privileged to have Professor Peter Turchin with us today to share his latest research on historical social science titled the Cliodynamics of End Times, Elites, Counter-Elites, and the Path of Political Disintegration. And many of us are very familiar with Professor Turchin's work, and he is now a project leader at the Complexity Science Hub, Vienna, a research associate at the University of Oxford, and an emeritus professor at the University of Connecticut. And as a leading figure in the field, his remarkable body of work includes more than 200 journal articles in journals like Science, Nature, and PNAS, and he also had a large body of groundbreaking books, including End Times, Ultra Society, Ages of Discord, and the forthcoming The Great Policy Transformation. So we are very happy to have Professor Peter Turchin with us today, and also. And for today's session structure, we will begin with a 1-hour lecture by Professor Turchin, and follow his talk, we will invite Professor Zhu Chen to have a short dialogue with Professor Turchin to share his thoughts and reflections on the ideas that are being presented. And finally, we will open the floor to a Q&A session. And for our audience online, please also feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we will also relay them to Professor Turchin. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Turchin for his talk. And
okay, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction and for inviting me to Hong Kong, my first visit to Hong Kong. So I find it very interesting. Anyway, the microphone is working, everything working, right? So 15 years ago, the international science journal Nature invited some scientists to to express their thoughts about the next decade. And most people wrote about how new discoveries would come on board, new technologies, maybe things like that. And unfortunately, I had to write a more pessimistic article. So it came out in early 2010, in which I argued that based on the trends that I had been following at that time, the next decade, which is the decade of from 2010 to 2020, was likely to be a period of growing instability, peaking during the 2020s. And then 10 years later, my colleague Andrei Karatayev and I have revisited this forecast to determine how well it had fared by that point. And what we found was that, unfortunately, the forecast was right on the money. So here I am showing data on one aspect of political instability, which is anti-government demonstrations, not peaceful demonstrations, but those which express anger and discontent. And what you can see here is that So what you can see here is that the 2010 was when the forecast was made, and up to that point, the incidence of anti-government demonstrations has been declining in 5 major countries, US, and maybe 4 major Western European countries. In fact, this trend at that time has prompted such well-known figures as Steven Pinker, for example, to write the book, The Better Angels, which actually was trying to explain why violence was declining. So my forecast was not based on just extrapolating this linear trend forward. It was based on something that I talked earlier about. Right, and another one is violent riots, violent urban riots. They show pretty much the same dynamic decline during, especially during the 2 decades before 2010. So here's where the forecast was like, and then explosion in all countries. And of course, we submitted the article to PLOS ONE in February 2020. All right. By the time it was accepted and we were going to revise it, we endured the summer of 2020, the summer of discontent, and of course, which culminated in January 6th of 2021. So we had to add an addendum to the article, basically saying, yes, okay, now we have, unfortunately, we have arrived precisely where the forecast was taking us. Anyway, so here's what I wanted to do in this talk is to explain to you where the forecast came from, because it's based on the body of research by myself and my colleagues. And this comes from a quantitative history. Here I'm visiting in the quantitative history group, right? So what we call this approach is, we call it Cliodynamics. So Clio is the Greek muse of history. Here she is depicted, she has thrown away her normal instruments like the brass, horn and so on, and she's now using the computer. And so that's idea, Clio with computer. And dynamics, of course, is the science of change. Life change happens. So first of all, I'll talk very briefly about why I think human systems can be studied as dynamical systems. And then I'll get into the meat of it. I'll talk about such processes as the wealth pump, the rate overproduction, and little bit crisis and aftermath. And I'm summarizing tons of research and tons of analysis. So because my time is limited, the approach here would be just to show you the highlights, trying to explain the logic underlying the analysis, show you some representative data sets, right? And but if you are interested in delving into details, I'll provide at the end some publications that you would be able to consult to fill in the gaps. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about why I believe that human systems are dynamical systems. We have now studied, so the states, human societies, organized as states, have appeared about 5,000 years ago, all right? And we have accumulated data on literally hundreds of those historical states. And what we see is a pattern. It's an invariable pattern that these states can go for a while, maybe centuries, sometimes longer, sometimes less, and keep internal peace and order and reasonably functional governments, all right? But then inevitably end times come, periods of social turbulence, political disintegration, fragmentation, and things like that. Now here we are in East Asia, and of course this pattern has been quite well known to the Chinese scholars. It has been referred to often as the dynastic cycle. Well, the news is that all state-level societies go through these periods of integrative and disintegrative phases. And so here is based on data from Peter and Sorokin. I'm showing you two examples. So one here is the instability in Rome over about 1,000 years of its history. You see here peaks of internal warfare associated with the transition from the kingdom to the republic, then the late republic and transition to the principate, and finally a transition from the principate to the dominant crisis of the 3rd century. And in between, you see these reasonably peaceful periods. Now, in France, again, also about 1,000 years of France, what we see here is the 9th century crisis, which resulted in the breakup of the Caribbean Empire. Then there was a long period of fragmentation, which ended with unification of France by the Carpathians, right? The late medieval crisis and the 17th century crisis, and actually then we have the age of revolution crisis, and perhaps we are now entering the next wave of instability. All right, so the theory and the data is really its goal, right? So I claim that what we have found is a feature of all state level societies, but because my time is short, I will focus on the country that I know best, United States, right? So from now on, I will be illustrating the major ideas and processes using United States data. Well, first of all, it's because I have lived in that country for 47 years. I know it from the inside. I have spent like decades collecting data, and my colleagues. So I'm on very strong empirical grounds when talking about using United States, but also for better or worse, United States is the hegemonic power today, and so we all need to know what are the likely trajectories that United States is going to follow in the next few years. So here, let's start with a much more detailed data on internal conflicts and internal instability. So this is the data I collected and published about 2012. So what we see here is that there are several typical ways that political instability has taken form during the last 240 years of the United States. Some of them are lethal urban riots. All the events here are included only if they resulted in at least one death, right? So this is the way for me. First of all, it's a practical issue because a violent riot which doesn't kill anybody is less likely to be reported. Okay, but secondly, it's a way to distinguish, violent demonstrations leading to a riot from peaceful demonstrations, which can be argued are part of normal functioning of democracy. So riots is it's many on many type of groups versus groups. Lynchings, it's typically collective groups against individual or a few individuals. Terrorism is one of few individuals attacking the society in a variety of ways, and the brown curve is all. So what you see here is that after some aftershocks following the American Revolution, there was an extremely peaceful couple of decades. In fact, 1820s was actually called this is actually when shortly after that point is when that's it. So just that this period was extremely free of violence, all right? And then the incidence of all of these different types of instability started to increase, and it reached a peak during the 1870s. Note that I don't even include civil war here, because civil war is 2 orders of magnitude greater than any of these events, because the biggest event, there was a riot that killed like 600 people, and later 1,000 people, but civil war killed 600,000 people. So here we are looking at the multiple, but the ride up to the civil war was quite diagnostic, right? It showed that the multitude of ways in which this stability was breaking down was actually indicative of troubles to come. And instability types here, as you can see, all of them, all the different types are present during this peak. And there were all kinds of different things. There were election riots, there were lynchings, there was a war of religion against the Mormons. There was a race, there was a uprising by slaves, So this is what's interesting, that if you look at each of those types of disturbances or outbreak of violence individually, you may not understand that they are actually all going up together. So there's probably a general reason that underlies this rise of violence. That's what I mean by when I say that you should think about social systems as systems, the dynamical systems of parts that are interconnected and that influence each other using a variety of feedback loops. Right, then there was some violence subsided a little bit, and then there was another peak. All right, and then again, we had a period of very high stability following World War II, and then we have it's increasing. So here actually that up to 2010, right? Because that's what was there used to me by me as part of the
Just to clarify, how would the assassination of Abraham Lincoln classify in this process?
It's there in 1865, so it adds to this.
Is it riots or terrorism?
I tell you what, why don't I? Yeah, please save your question, because I want to present you my story, and then I'm happy to address those questions. All right. So what we see here is that we see complex dynamics of instability, and this is, by the way, not only United States. So, for example, here, notice that many of these peaks have this sawtooth structure, right? This data is collected at 25-year intervals. So up and down is a 50-year cycle on average, right? So what we see here and also see here, for example, what we see is that there is a long secular cycle, right? Roughly speaking, one century of integrated phase, 1 century or longer of disintegrated phase. But on top of that are overlaid 50-year cycles. And that's what we see in the United States. So we see the cycle of 1820 was suppressed. You don't see anything there because the conditions were not the structural conditions about which I will talk shortly were so favorable that there was no peak. But after that, we see peaks every 50 years. And of course, now in 2020, so back 15 years ago, I put a question mark. Now we can remove that question mark. So we have this 50-year cycle, which is overlaid on the secular cycle. So here's the secular cycle. The minimum 1820, then high level of violence, and even between 50-year peaks, that did not go very far down. Then another wide period and rise to the next wave. So, there are two separate cycles, and they are driven by different mechanisms. I'm going to, because time is short, I will focus on the long cycle, all right? But keep in mind that situation is more complex, and I'm happy to talk during the questions about that. Anyway, so okay, stepping back from these details, United States, even though United States has rapidly industrialized during this period, and now we live in a post-industrial society, we see the same pattern of internal violence as we see in other historical states. This suggests that the mechanisms underlying it actually are, they have preserved their function, they continue working, even though societies may change quite a lot. Of course, in the model that we construct for our society, we will take into account those changes. But the forces on which I will be focusing, they are actually ubiquitous, and they've been around for 5,000 years. Okay, so what are these forces? Here's the diagram just showing you the logical structure of theory. We think of societies, we simplify societies and think of them as, first of all, general population, all right? Then elites, I'll talk more about elites, 1, 2, 3%, all right? And then the state institutions is a separate player from the elites, all right? So so we represent societies as a tripartite structure. And the outcome that we are interested in predicting and understanding is instability. So the dynamics of this system. All right, so let's start with the general population or commoners. All right. So what is it about the general population that provides the fuel for this cycle? Okay, let's take a look at data for the last 100 years in the United States. And this is real wages, so wages adjusted for inflation. And what we see here until 1970s, the wages both for unskilled workers and manufacturing workers, it's scaled to 100% at 1937, right? They've been growing quite well. In fact, even the war and even the World War II did not have a big effect. And then something happened in the 1970s, and suddenly wages stagnated or even declined, right? So, for example, the unskilled wages declined during the 1990s, and grew in the 1980s, grew up in the 1990s, and then declined again, all right? So why, meanwhile, the overall economy, as measured by either GDP per capita or, which is sort of equivalent, the average productivity for workers just kept going up, all right? So, what happened? Now, this the last 100 years is actually also, if we can extend this by looking at a different statistic, not real wage, but relative wage. So, what I'm trying to capture here is trying to capture the fact that the economy continued to grow, but wages stagnated. All right. So now what I do, I divide the GDP per capita by wage. All right, and that gives me this relative wage. So what we see here two cycles. There are periods when relative wage increases, like here and here. What this means is that workers actually are doing better than overall economy. All right, workers actually are gaining compared to the overall economy. But then there are periods when relative wage declines, and that is when workers are not sharing the fruits of economic growth. All right, and of course, notice that the previous bunch of instability was here, and now, of course, we entered another one. So, this when a relative wage declines, I call this the wealth pump. Actually, it's not, the wealth pump sounds nice, but it is not a nice thing. It's a perverse mechanism that takes wealth from the poor and gives wealth from the workers and gives it to economic elites. All right. So the question is, why? What happens? Why do we see this? And we see this. We look at the data for wherever we have good data on wages and well-being. You see the same thing happens in other societies. There is this secular cycle, roughly speaking, 2 centuries, which affects the relative wage. Well, the best explanation that we have, and we can actually, we have good data for the United States, what happened in the 1970s. But this is a general thing. So when societies experience long integrative periods, so 3, 4, 5 generations that experience internal peace and order, all right, what happens is that people in power, the elites, they get not only accustomed to taking it for granted, this stability, right? But also it is a human nature to try to profit from a variety of circumstances. And so the people in power attempted to use their power to rebalance the society in their favor at the expense of everybody else. This is actually known as the iron law of oligarchy. It has a formal name in sociology. So I don't know how many of you saw Wall Street. There's the evil character there when he's asked why do you raid companies? And he said, because I can. All right, and so this is what happens over and over in thousands of past societies. That because elites have the power, they actually start behaving selfishly and at the expense of everybody else. Right. So by sucking wealth from the common population, the wealth pump creates popular immiseration. So the wealth operation of the wealth pump has 3 consequences. The first one, it creates popular immiseration. And people, yesterday at lunch, we were discussing this, the Trump and everything. And several people said, well, I mean, America is the richest country in the world. Why would, why are people unhappy? Well, in my book, End Times, I actually spent a whole chapter slicing this up. I don't have time to go through this, all right? But since 1970, the degree of immiseration has gradually increased because many of the statistics that we use to capture, the economic well-being, once you start digging them apart, they actually show that things are worse than they are. But also, we use the multi-proxy approach, right? So let's look at other non-economic proxies of well-being. So, for example, this comes from the book by Case and Deaton, which has the title "Deaths of Despair." They look at suicide, alcohol-related deaths, and drug-related deaths, and then they sum them up. And when you look at these deaths of despair, you see basically that they have declined after 1910 or so, right? And then started to grow gradually, and especially increased in the last 30 years or so. So this is a second way of looking at well-being by looking at these graphs. And then we can also look at other indicators such as life expectancy. So back in 2010, when I started giving this type of talk, I would say, oh yeah, of course we live in the post-Malthusian world. So yes, the life expectancy was a good indicator back for pre-industrial populations, but of course this is not going to happen in the United States. Boy, was I wrong. All right, so in fact, life expectancy started to decline here in 2013, I believe. So well before the COVID epidemic. Of course, COVID epidemic is coming back up, but it has not reached this peak. Also, if you compare United States to peer countries, right? All right, you can see that this gap, there was always a gap, because United States is a peculiar country in many ways, but it has grown. All right, and certainly this heat is quite unprecedented for OECD countries. So what I'm saying here, I'm only giving you a few highlights. We looked at a dozen or so different indicators of well-being, including economic, social well-being, biological well-being, and so on and so forth, they all agree that immiseration is real. Okay, so immiseration is the first outcome of the operation of the wealth pump. What are the other two? Right, so here's now we need to talk about the elites, and I use sociological definition. So elites are a small percent of the population who concentrate social power in their hands. They are neither bad nor good, they are not smart, not stupid. They are simply power holders, right? And power comes in, as we know, from researchers like Michael Mann, social power comes in four different forms: military power, coercion, economic power, administrative or political power, and ideological or persuasion power. So there are elites who specialize in those different types of power, but we are looking at all of them together because they are typically quite intertwined. All right. So because relative wages of workers decline, this decline translates into increasingly larger fraction of GDP that goes to those who consume labor, right? So the economic elites, which is owners and managers of large, medium and small corporations. And as a result of this, we see not only, an increase in the number of such elites, not as much because of biological reproduction, although of course the wealthiest people, the wealthiest man in the world has like 10 children or something like that, right? But that's really not a terribly significant factor in Western societies or Christian societies, post-Christian societies. It is much more important factor, by the way, in Islamic societies, and that's why, by the way, Islamic cycles are much faster than cycles in China or especially Europe. Anyway, mostly for the United States, it's the upward social mobility. And back in the 19th century, the way it worked was that a particularly energetic and hardworking, skilled worker would start his own shop. And because the labor prices are going down, right, that person could actually bootstrap himself into wealth, and that actually is the pathway that many 19th century tycoons took. Today, it's more, today the most common route is you work very hard, work your way up the corporate ladder, become CEO, then retire with a golden parachute, right? So many people who started from humble backgrounds are now millionaires and billionaires. But the reason you can do it now and not 50 years ago is because 50 years ago, there was no wealth pump to fuel your rise in the ranks of the wealthy. So elite numbers increase, also consumption levels also increase because, I don't want to go into great detail, but just think about conspicuous consumption, billionaires buying huge yachts and so on and so forth. So the result of that is that the society grows top heavy. You have lots of wealth holders. So one type of a power holder is wealth holder, all right? And their consumption levels also increase. So here are the data. Over the past 20 years or so, right, the number of people, households holding either 1 million worth 5 billion or 10 billion, so decabillionaires here, it is in inflation-adjusted dollars. They have increased in proportion to the population. So when we talk about 1%, this is actually not a good way to think about it. So here's 1%. This is the back in 2001, the 1% by wealth were people who had $5 million or more, right? But then it started from much less than 1%, and now it's more than 1%. Look here specifically at Uber wealth, 10 million. Same thing, actually even worse for billionaires. The numbers of billionaires. So here, actually, in not population adjusted, this is proportion population, but in absolute numbers, the numbers of decamillionaires increased tenfold over this period. This is the second consequence of the wealth pump. It just churns out wealth holders. Now, you would say, why is that bad? Because after all, that's the American dream, right? So should we envy those people? Well, the problem is that I'm not envious to all those individuals, but the problem is that creates a significant strain on the social fabric. So first of all, their numbers and consumption levels eventually overshoot their productive base, which is the commoner workers. And historically, after 1 or 2 generations of this wealth pump operating, we suddenly start seeing, like back in the medieval period, we see second and third sons, right? And they have no land, no peasants to use them for support, and similar things happen today. But more important is that the number of power position is limited, especially in the political sphere. So think about it. So we have now 10 times as many Uber wealth holders as 30 years or 40 years ago. All right. Some proportion of them, not huge, but some proportion of them is going to go into politics. So Trump, of course, is quite emblematic of this, but Michael Bloomberg is another billionaire, and many other wealthy individuals. Steve Forbes, for example, ran for presidency, although unsuccessfully, and so on and so forth. Now, even though it's a small proportion of wealth holders who go into politics, but now we have 10 times as many. But we'll still have 1 presidency, 100 senator seats, and so on and so forth down the road. So this is what I call elite overproduction. It's like a game of musical chairs, right? Except instead of removing chairs as the game goes along, you keep the number of chairs constant. So you start with 10 chairs and 11 players, all right? And then you keep 10 chairs, but then you have 12 players, 15 players, 20 players, 30 players. Remember, it's tenfold increase. Chairs are the same, but we have tenfold as many players. So I would not advise playing this game with your children, because you can imagine what will happen. At some point, when there are too many losers, they become angry. People start breaking rules. For example, so you're walking around the chairs. I think that music is about to stop. I stop by a free chair and I just push everybody else away, right? And of course, very soon this will lead to fist fights and so on and so forth. And this is sort of what happens in reality. So there's some data on the number of candidates. So this is the candidates not just from the 2 parties, but before the primaries, right? And what we see here is that, first of all, the number of candidates has been increasing. And secondly, the number of so-called millionaires, these are the people who spend $500,000 of their own dollars. The idea is that if you have $500,000 to spend on your campaign, then you probably are at least a millionaire. So their numbers have also increased. And also the cost of living adjusted for inflation has been increasing. So these are all indicators of greater demand for those positions. And of course, remember that not everybody, not all of the wealth holders, politically interested wealth holders, run for office themselves. People like Peter Thiel, for example, he didn't run for office, he supported other candidates. So we have this extra wealth is translated into elite overproduction. All right. So because we have this increasing numbers of losers, All right. Again, some of those people who fail to gain a power position, they simply go and become a carpenter or something like that. But some proportion of them are angry and willing to start breaking rules to get their position by other means. So those are counter elites. So again, the more losers we have, frustrated elites in our lingo, the more counter elites. So we see the production of counter elites, and then those start unifying. And we can, towards the end, if I have time, we'll talk a little bit about what happened in November, because this is just a classical example of how these dynamics work around. All right, so elite production drives up inter-elite competition, and that undermines social political stability because counter elites challenge established elites. You can see this quite clearly. So, for example, this is 2016, right? This was 17 major candidates. This was unprecedentedly a large number of candidates. Of course, in 2020 there was like 21 Democratic candidates. So you see this elite production sort of happening in front of your eyes. And of course, one individual there was very successful at breaking rules, essentially, right? Which is what you expect in this game of musical chairs, and gained the presidency. All right. Now, immiseration, overproduction of wealth holders. The third and final factor is overproduction of degree holders, of the credentialed elites. Now, what happens is that population immiseration of amongst most the general population creates a powerful incentive for people subject to it to attempt to escape. And how do you do it? If you don't have wealth, how do you try to get away? In the United States and here, you go to college, right? Unfortunately, that was pretty good. So you say you want to get into the 10%, right? Then if you went to college in 1950 and played by the rules and everything, there are only less than 15% of the population of youth went to college. So if you don't screw up, you're essentially guaranteed a place in the 10% by wealth. Unfortunately, now it's over 60% of the high school graduates who go into college. And as a result of that, the expected wealth premium, right, for this is the birth cohort. So 1930s, these are people who went to college in 1950s and so on. Right, it has been declining and essentially collapsed. So by early 2000s, right, when these individuals went to college, their knowledge became worthless. So you go to you get an advanced degree. You go medical school, you go to dental school, but most importantly, if you have political ambitions, you go to the law school. And that's what we see. There's a bunch of data. I won't spend too much time on this. Just look at here. This is the number of lawyers per 1,000 population, right? Notice that around 1970s, it had been growing and just increased. And in fact, here it was declining. And the reason it was declining and stable here, even though the demand for lawyers actually increased, right? Because the society became more sophisticated and litigious, but the number of lawyers did not respond because there was no wealth pump, there was no immiseration, there was no big push factor, all right? And then once the wealth pump started operating, we see this. Now, this is an amazing graph. I mean, most of us know about, about the distribution of income. So here's salaries. Right. Typically, it has a mode and then a long right tail. And that's the way the starting salaries of law school graduates looked like up to 1990s. And then suddenly, starting in 1990s, the second bulge appeared. And this is for 2010, and it's still continuing. So now we have two modes and nothing pretty much in between. So this is how this musical chairs game plays out. It's about 25% who finish law school, they got a chair. All right, I mean, look at this, 160, now it's $190,000 per year. That's the salary that is guaranteed to propel you even probably into 1%. All right, and then the rest of them are sitting here. Now it has shifted, the mode is at 60,000. I mean, this is not even enough to pay off the loans that you got, to go to law school. So this is the frustrated elite aspirants, and some of them will become counter-elites. Now, lawyers tend to be the most dangerous profession from the point of view of the social stability. Lawyer. Okay, we are today, well, no, not today. 2 years ago, United States has overproduced lawyers by a factor of 3 to 1. There were 3 times as many law school graduates as jobs for them, which you saw in that graph. All right, now in the last 2 years comes AI, and it is destroying right now. It has already destroyed half of their positions. So we are overproducing lawyers 6 to 1. All right, so dangerous. All right, so that's the third thing. So immiseration, overproduction of wealth holders, overproduction of degree holders. In the United States and in Western Europe, the ruling class is composed of wealth holders and credential holders. So the proverbial 1% and 10%, right? So Republican Party used to be the party of 1% of the wealth holders. Democratic Party used to be way back the party of the working class, but by 1990s it became the party of 10% of the credential. So this is the summary. So these 3 factors result in mass mobilization, intra-elite competition both in the wealth and the credential sphere. It leads to state fragility, which I don't have time to talk about, and also international environment can be important, especially for smaller countries. But for countries like the United States and China, it's probably not terribly important. They are insulated from those things. All right, so now I want to come to some kind of a closure and talk about where might we go from here. So I argue that the United States in particular is now in the revolution. In fact, I would say that we are officially from 2021, we were in the revolutionary situation, and now we are in the revolution. Fortunately, there's still, and hopefully it won't happen. There has been no people decapitated or anything. So right now, the coalition of counter elites who came to power, they are trying to basically fire all the established elites. All right, you'll see how successful they are in this and whether they can, whether it will be peaceful outcome or not. So, what are the chances of keeping this peaceful? My good friend and co-author, Walter Scheidel, whose book I heartily recommend, takes a very pessimistic view. He looks at the increases and declines of inequality. To me, inequality is a proxy. It's not the driving factor. It's one of the indicators, right? But still, inequality is something we can look through the ages and see these waves of inequality. And it's very typical. Inequality tends to increase in the pre-crisis period, and then we have a crisis, and the crisis in a variety of ways resolves, makes societies more equal. Never completely equal, of course. We're talking about, agrarian societies, which were, but they become less unequal and more functional. So he claims that death is the great leveler. He says that basically the only way to to end this cycle and start a new one is either by mass mobilization warfare, transformative revolution, state failure or collapse, or lethal pandemic. My point of view is a bit more optimistic, or at least, well, I'll tell you what I mean by being slightly less pessimistic. Right, so what our theory suggests is that entry into the crisis is fairly channelized. It's like a ball rolling down the valley with steep slopes. There's not really much that any particular individual can do until you get to the crisis. Once you get to the crisis, you're on the cusp, and all different roads are open to you. Some of them lead to peaceful resolution, others lead to violent resolutions. All right. So the exit from crisis is hugely contingent, and that is where apparently individual or small groups can actually influence it for better or worse. All right, so a bit more formal. So here, if you look at collective well-being, is decline and leading to crisis. You have a pressure, social pressures for crisis rising. Here's the crisis, and then we have the whole fan of possibilities. So we have collected data on 200 past societies sliding into and out of crisis. And it turns out that there is no such thing as a typical collapse. It's like in Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, every unhappy family is unhappy in their own ways. All right. And so if you look by the different components of the severity of outcome, population decline, dramatic collapse, population epidemics, blah, blah, blah. And look at them. So what you see, there is actually quite a distribution. So unfortunately, the majority of crises have a few of those. And that's what I mean. Some have epidemics, others are transformative revolutions, during civil wars, and so on and so forth. But there is actually 10 to 15% of societies that do manage to resolve issues in a non-violent, without death, without involving massive death. All right, and in my book and Times, I talk about those positive examples. But since my time is running out, right, so this is not really optimistic. But there is one other optimistic thing. As we look at this, the past 5,000 years, right, we see that the probability of a reform-led exit from the crisis increases. It is what looks like, but this needs to be documented with data, is that accumulating institutions, governance institutions, including democracy institutions, but also more productive economies and many other things, they actually reduce the probability of a violent civil war or revolution. All right, so just to say that I've been hitting the highlights. If you are interested in details, I first recommend the book by Jack Goldstone. This is 1991, completely prescient book, where he proposed the initial version of structural demographic theory, which is what I've been talking to you about. If you're interested in history, right, this is the book with the Russian historian Sergei Fedorov that we wrote here. You look at 8 different secular cycles in ancient Rome, medieval and early modern England and France, and in Russia. This book is the academic book from which the graphs of my talk came. And last year I published, this is a popular book. It has no graphs or anything, but it brings the story up to up to 2 years ago. All right, so conclusions. So the major structural cause of the end times is the wealth pump. Turning the wealth pump on drives elite overproduction and increased immiseration, and also contributes to state weakness in ways that I didn't explain. All right. So in past societies, these structural conditions usually ended up with major outbreaks of political violence. So 85 to 90% of cases, Walter Scheidel is right. And this is what I used to give this talk from 2007, right? And every year I would do it. I would look at the data and say, my God, I mean, we're still moving. I mean, we are running down that narrow valley. We are not getting out of it. And of course, now we are in crisis, but hopefully still can navigate outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Turchin. And now we would like to invite Professor Chen to the stage and to have a short dialogue with Professor Turchin.
Should I stay here?
Yeah, I think
Ah,
we.
Thank you, Peter, for a very interesting quick review of your books, especially End Times. It's very illustrative of your way of looking at history, human societies, especially the evolution of complex societies from prehistoric times to the present. Even though today you are focused mostly on the recent experience. So maybe if I can summarize correctly, your main proposition is that intra-elite or overproduction of elites plus, okay, let me say it differently. So overproduction of elites leads to intra-elite competition, which adds to the cycles of instability. So what has happened or what is happening in the US and other major developed countries, according to your interpretation, is really a result of the overproduction of elites. For example, the overproduction of lawyers in the US. This is one area or one example you have highlighted. But on the other hand, there is also a lot of research that shows that technological changes and then also globalization. These two trends have contributed at least to the recent distress in the American society and other Western societies. So how do you reconcile the different interpretations of what is happening and what led to what is happening now in terms of the crisis in the US and other developed societies? So technology, globalization, and then you say overproduction of elites. Which of the three explanations should come first in explanatory power, which is the second, and so on? Do you see any contradiction among the explanations?
Thank you for this question. Essentially, I would say that elite overproduction in combination with immiseration, this combination is explosive. So because without immiseration, you don't have mass movements, right, which provide the fuel for elites. So Trump managed to get into power because he was mobilizing, non-college graduate, 60% of the American population, who you can think of as working class, right? But this is the same story we see over the past thousands of years. So if you think about Gaius Gracchus, right? He was a Roman nobleman coming from a very wealthy and notable family, right? But by that point in the late Republic, both elite reproduction and immiseration have increased to the point where he became a populist. He was the leader of the Populares, the original populist party, and so he was using this discontent to drive his political career. And there are just tons of examples of this. So first, the first point I would want to make is that it's really the combination. Without elite reproduction, mass mobilization potential cannot work. I mean, peasant rebellions are handily destroyed by mounted armored knights. Today, look at all those Robocops. If you want to rebel against the state, you will be very quickly put into prison. So this is why it's a combination. Right. Your next point, if you are interested in a general theory that actually surprisingly applies to all state-level human societies, right? All state-level human societies have elites, because this is a law of sociology. We are not ants. Ants don't have elites. They use pheromones to organize their action. But humans have to use their networks, essentially, of power. And that means that those who have central position, they acquire power. So once we have elites, then all this works, whether it's today in America or 2,000 years ago in Republican Rome. However, of course, human societies are complex. There are several factors that I only mentioned. For example, number 4 was the international environment. So this is geopolitical things, geoeconomic and geocultural. So geopolitical is when another country starts meddling in your country. Geoeconomic is when you're affected by global economy. So, for example, the increase of global food prices was the immediate trigger for the Arab Spring revolution. So all those factors are there. I did not mention a very important factor is the youth bulge. Yeah, I mean, human societies are complex. So I had to focus on the major factors. Now, globalization was used by the American elites as part of the wealth fund. That was how, by shipping high-paying manufacturing jobs abroad to China in particular, this was one of the mechanisms by which the economic elites have reduced the bargaining power of workers and depressed their wages. All right. So globalization is, but globalization, we're not in a unique situation. Globalizations happened before, all right? And there were medieval globalizations through the Silk Routes and things like that. Okay, I don't want to go into that rabbit hole. Just want to say that there is nothing really, well, it was not globalization, it was continentalization, whatever. Anyway, so globalizations, actually, we see waves of globalization associated with the pre-crisis periods. And the final thing you talked about was the technical change, the technological change. And yes, previously, automation, for example, was a serious factor in 19th century crisis in UK when the Luddites who did not want to be replaced by machines. Now, the problem today is that today AI replaces elite aspirants. Actually, the first technological change replaced horses with the engine of internal combustion. And the result of that, horses, the horse population now is 1% of what it was in 1800. So the horses were genocided. All right, workers with more power than horses, so they were immiserated, but then things have sort of got equilibrated. Now we are in a situation where their power aspirants are genocided, and they are not going to take it kindly. So to sum up my long response to you is that I acknowledge all those complicating factors, right? And in the computational model that we built for this, we actually include them. But in a 50-minute talk, I wanted to focus on the most important things and the ones which are common to all state-level societies.
So I guess now, of course, many researchers, experts, and so on are still trying to explain what happened in the US, especially in the November election. My understanding is that Trump winning and appointing all his strange friends to loyalist supporters to very key government positions, all show that this result in the U.S. May be more like an outcome or a result of the competition between the uneducated working class and the educated elites, rather than a result of intra-elite competition, right? Am I getting it wrong?
Here I will disagree with you. So the working class, those people without college education, they provided the raw power. They voted, right, and outvoted. So what happened is this. Let me give you the structural demographic interpretation of November 5. So remember, I mentioned that Democrats used to be part of the working class, and then during the Clinton administration, especially, they became the party of the 10%. So this is the well-to-do lawyers, college professors, and so on and so forth. Right. Whereas the Republicans for a long time were the party of 1%, the party of the wealth. Now, what happened was that by 2016, we had two parties of the ruling class, both of the 1% and the 10%, and there was nobody to represent the 90%. And this is, by the way, a general thing. There is a book in which Thomas Piketty is a co-author, that they show that this has been the evolution of parties everywhere in the Western Europe and North America. All right, so what has Trump done? Just like Gaius Gracchus, he mobilized those who were not represented, and they propelled him to the first victory in 2016. But at that point, he appointed the same, all his appointees were from the established elites, and they basically sabotaged everything that he wanted to do, all right? Except for things that, he reduced taxes on the wealthy. Yes, sure, that's good, right? But other things, they didn't agree with them, and they sabotaged them. All right, so then we have the counter revolution in 2020. He is out of power, and now he is much savvier. And also, by this point, the counter elites have increased. So what we see, it was not just Trump. Trump is just the tip of the iceberg. Who came to power was a coalition of counter elites, right? Whereas, in the process, the Democratic Party has become just a party of the ruling class. We see this because many of the Republicans, right, established Republicans, defected to the Democratic Party. So people like Cheney's, right, or many neocons, they left Republicans and went over to Democrats, and vice versa. Those Democratic counter elites. So think about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., right? He started as a Democrat, but he bolted, and then Tulsi Gabbard, who was a Democratic congresswoman, so she went over to Trump. Then you have Musk, all right? And then you have people like Tucker Carlson. So he wields persuasion power, right? And even Joe Rogan. So Joe Rogan, for example, I don't know how many of you know all these details, but he was a left-wing Democrat. He was a supporter of Bernie Sanders, right? And then he switched over to Trump. So what is happening? This is very typical. On the edge of revolution, counter elites have united to overthrow the ruling regime. Now, what happens next, by the way, is very interesting. As we know, revolution devours its children. So I fully expect, it will be very interesting to see how long this coalition will actually hold, because they're very different people. J.D. Vance is the populist, but Elon Musk is a libertarian. That's completely opposite. They are together because they both are angry and they want to overthrow the elites. What will happen next is actually going to be very interesting. So hopefully, does this address your question?
Yeah, or you can say, the elites and the counter elites try to take advantage of the conflict being created due to technological changes, globalization between the working class, uneducated on the one hand, and the well-to-do class, on the other hand.
Yeah, let me just add, yes, thanks for bringing this up. So the Democrats have completely lost. They don't understand the working class. Their appeal to the working class was ridiculous, and that's why they lost. So it was the Republican Party is now a revolutionary party. All right, because they want to overthrow the elites, they want to replace them. That's why Trump is appointing all those counter-elite figures. All right, but the 90% of the population or 60% of the population simply voted. They are not players anymore. They put him in power, but now they are not players.
So going back to Walter Shadow's work, his book, based on history, then there are four major events or major types of events that can lead to the leveling off of the discontent or income concentration in a few years. So this time, how will the instability end? Is it going to end in one of the four types of events? You know, mass scale war, or mass scale revolution, or a lot of state failures and collapse. Well, after we just had COVID, so it's unlikely that there's going to be another major epidemic to smooth things over. So which way do you think this time will end? If you use again history as a prediction, and you mentioned that you don't totally agree with Walter Shadow's summary of historical experience, but using your framework and your new insights, which way will this round of instability will end?
So historically, 10–15% of exits were a result of adoption of reforms, such as the New Deal in the United States, the Charters period in UK, or the Great Reform period in Russia, which only brought Russia 50 years of internal peace, but still it resolved, it avoided revolution. So, but because we have been accumulating institutions, our societies are much less fragile than the first state level societies, which were just incredibly fragile, right? So I would say that you have probably at least 20–30% chance of navigating it without violence, maybe 50%. But I would still say that at least 50% chance of this violence spiraling up is definitely present. It's definitely present. And anybody who tells you that I can predict what's going to happen, how it will all end, they're either fools or crooks, right? So don't believe them because from history, I showed you, it's a huge spectrum. And in fact, even the bad outcomes, they're all different. In some outcomes, the Black Death destroyed half of the population, but not elites. Then elites had to fight each other because there were just too many elites per population, right? That's why you have 100 Years War in France, or the Wars of the Roses in England, right? So that's one way. The other way is the French Revolution, where they essentially cut off the heads of the established elites, all right? And then, of course, there are those examples where the Tsar Alexander II told nobility in the meetings that we either have revolution from below or we have reforms from above. Which do you choose? And then he shoved the reforms down their throats. All right. So this is something that may happen. So specifically talking about Trump, I mean, first of all, the types of things that they want to do. What needs to be done is we need to shut down the wealth fund. The only person who is sort of talking about that is like J.D. Vance, who is a populist, and he wants to improve the workers, right? If you do that, if you get the income of workers on track back to go up with GDP per capita, then this will shut down the wealth pump, and that means that all the super wealthy, they do sort of wither on the vine. This is what happened after the New Deal, well, actually helped by the Great Depression. If you look at the number of billionaires, all right, they actually decreased. The number of, this was a great compression from 1930s all the way to 1980. And this means that a whole bunch of wealthy people stopped being wealthy. And that's what unfortunately will require to get us back on track. And this is why unfortunate, because of course, the wealthy people with power will resist those types of things. That's why the probability of violence is still very, very likely. All right, so all I can say is probabilistically, and we will be able to refine this rough, I'm saying 20–30%, right? We'll be able to refine this estimate because this is why we're collecting hundreds of past crises, so that we can actually estimate not just the overall probability, but how it has been, and what conditions actually help to predict peaceful resolution. So we'll have more in about a couple of years, hopefully.
Okay, let me open it up to the floor. Anyone? Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for the excellent talk. Now, I was relieved by your optimism on the exit of the current situation, and I also particularly appreciate your humility not to predict the future. Now, however, according to your fan theory, everything is possible. Then how did you make the bold prediction back in 2010 about the instability in 2020s? And for many decision makers who are not only interested in the academic discussion, but also about making decisions going forward, how would your approach help them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, remember I said that the entry into crisis is much more predictable than exit from the crisis. All right, so that's why I was able to capitalize on that in 2010. And also, when I made it very clear back 15 years ago and over the years since then, that it was a scientific prediction, because individual people could have acted. For example, if suddenly the powerful elites in United States read my work 15 years ago, in principle, they could have avoided these things. Also, keep in mind that different countries are at different, stages in this road. So France, for example, started getting unequal much later than the United States. So in principle, if the French elites would, understand what's happening, they may not get to another French Revolution. All right. So prediction here is what the important part of prediction. It's first of all scientific prediction, because that helps us distinguish between different theories. So we have one theory by Steven Pinker that violence is declining. The other theory is no, because of the structural demographic things, violence is going to increase. So now we can reject Steven Pinker's theory. But more importantly, we need prediction in the more engineering sense. What do we need to do to avoid the worst outcomes, right? So predicting doom is not useful. Predicting what you can do to avoid doom is useful, right? And that would be my argument.
And how about given the uncertainty of the exit, how do you think that people would learn from your work to make better decisions?
The major insight is that we need to shut down the wealth pump. So it's a very difficult process. So we need to start thinking about how to do that. And if you do that before you get into crisis, then you avoid crisis. All right. So, but our science is not as good as engineering, like bridge building. Bridge building, there is like a book, and you can just, how to do it. How to solve these things. We have we need more science. And that's what I see my role is that we need to build better models and test them better with more data so that we can actually improve our ability to predict what sort of interventions we need to take in order to avoid the worst.
Yes, question there.
Yeah.
And then we'll take a question from the online audience.
Yeah, great talk. I had two questions. First was a small clarification. You talk about the Wells pump, and at the same time you talk about elite overproduction and people moving up to the elite. So if you could clarify what is the relationship between the two, because the one says, all of the West is going to the elites, and the other is saying, more elites are joining. So if you could clarify how that two things work together. And the second thing I was wondering, assuming we survive the 2020s all alive and well, and the United States finds some kind of solution that does not involve a World War III or a civil war, some kind of thing like that, what do you think is going to be in the long term the effect of the declining birth rates in various developed countries? Because most developed countries at the moment have below replacement birth rate. So if that pattern continues, what do you think would that mean down the line 30 to 40 years when you don't have these use bulges and there's actually this population around?
Okay.
Or same amount numbers?
So dealing with the first question, so Wells pump is a general mechanism. So back, let's say, if you go to 13th century France, England, and other Middle Europe, what we see there was a very substantial population growth. That's really what turned the Wells pump on, because there was too many potential workers for land to work on. And so the elites who were land owners, right, they basically used that to drive the rents up, wages down, and as a result of that, let's say a count, whereas in the 11th century, he would just use primogeniture and leave all his land to one son, and others had to do something else. But in the 13th century, given that favorable conjuncture, they would sometimes split their holdings and establish both sons. So that's how this elite or production was working. At the same time, because of immiseration, there were many people who were quite desperate to get out. So they went, for example, became mercenaries, like Don Hopwood, for example, and others. And they actually also got into elites. But of course, 99% of them got killed, but some of them were got into elites. And so this is very similar to what I was describing to you, that happens in the, let's say, medieval. And I just can go on. I can talk about China, for example. In my book, I talk about Taiping rebellion. By the way, my book ranges over quite a number of different countries. So in the interest of time, I won't talk about the Taiping rebellion, but it's a classical structural demographic thing. So wealth pump can be turned on in a variety of ways. Or globalization, for example, right, and the loss of jobs, or immigration, massive immigration, increases labor supply, but increases labor supply, but does not increase labor demand. So all those factors can turn the wealth pump on, and then you have both, the two routes. One of the established elites multiply, the other one, the commoners go out. All right. Second question is that everybody is worried about falling natalities, falling rates of reproduction. I'm not, because that's one way to shut down the wealth pump, right? So everybody says China is going to. Okay, there are two people. Sometimes the same person says, let's say China. China is going to be destroyed because of the one child policy, because there's not going to be enough workers enough. And the same person 2 weeks later in a column says China is in big trouble because the college graduates have 30% jobless rate. I mean, how do you reconcile those two things? I mean, so what's happening is that in history, when in the 17th century in England, you have great data from parish records So the reproduction collapsed. All right. As a result of that, population actually stagnated and even declined a little bit. Meanwhile, new technologies came aboard. They required more work. So workers became in great demand. Their wages, incomes increased. And what happened? I mean, they started having more children because they could afford more children. So, so to me, in the short run, this decline in childbearing rates is it's actually it's not problematic at all from the structural theory. It's a bad thing for the elites. The elites, you know, economic elites, they want to have more people and make more children, more workers. You know, they actually say back in the 19th century and today, they say, I want to have surplus workers. I mean, today they don't say it publicly like they did in the 19th century. Today they just among themselves, they say, yeah, I want to have all the surplus workers. So that when my workers want to increase wages, I should fire them and get those. All right. Falling birth rates is a problem for the economic elites, not for the workers.
So Peter, there are two questions. From
All right,
online audience.
forces at play. I see. Let's go back there. That's the first question. Oops. No, I don't have. Yes.
But you can just.
Yeah, let's go to, yeah, hello from surplus elite. Yeah. Okay, right, let's deal with this first.
Oops. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so then we have, yeah. All right, let's deal with that. Hello from surplus elite donor from the US. My question is, how does the ecological crisis, including climate change, fit in your analysis? It would seem exogenous to the factors you lay out as most important, though not exogenous to the political economic systems, but it would seem to provide extra impetus to political violence. How do you think about ecological pressures in your analysis? Yes, thank you for this question. This is in addition to issues that Liu brought up. This is another factor that is not always present, but sometimes is present in the run-up to the crisis. So, for example, in the run-up to the medieval crisis, many people don't know, but in 1315 through 1322, there was a series of really bad years, cold and wet years in Western Europe. And in fact, that brought the Great Famine and killed 10 to 50% of the population. And so that made the society even more, of course, the elites survived it much better than commoners, and that made society even more top-heavy and advanced the crisis. All right, so all those things are quite possible. And same thing, something like that. You know, we have increased food prices due to whatever climate change, right? That would be increasing immiseration and advancing the crisis. Still, but it still is a secondary factor, I would argue, and we should take it into account. But most of the time, climate change, both in the past and today, is not going to have a very dramatic effect. It's a secondary factor that you want to include in the computational model, but not necessarily as one of the.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So one last question from Professor Sun. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Excellent presentation and many useful insights. I actually just an on question on the wealth pump, like how to solve the wealth. I'm just wondering at this day and age.
No, speak up because this microphone is not working.
Okay, sorry. At this day and age, right? Is it difficult in your view to solve the wealth pump issue without coordination? I'm just thinking, like, if you think about China, what it has been done, what it has been doing in the past 10 years, to some extent, you can actually interpret that as trying to shut down the wealth pump. But by doing so, right, you are getting all these economic activities outwards and capital going outwards, and that create other potential problems. So what's your view on this matter?
Yeah, this is very interesting. So Xi Jinping is criticized in Western newspapers as as pushing out the billionaires, mistreating billionaires, right? And taking over the banking system. But actually, the financial capital in the United States and Western Europe is a big part of the problem. They are not really producing much, but they are the scheme of, it's a form of a wealth pump, actually. So, if you think about it, what's the purpose of the bank? Is it to make financial billionaires, or is it to fund, to invest in economy and help businesses go up? So, according to some, radical economists, we need state banks, we don't need private banks. And so, according to them, so people like Michael Hudson, for example, he actually says that Mr. Xi is doing the right thing. And same thing with billionaires. Once you get, I don't know how much you need, 10 million, once you have a few $millions worth of wealth, you don't, the extra, it doesn't increase your quality of life. It's pure power. So if you're a billionaire, 99% of your wealth is pure power. You can buy politicians, you can buy newspapers like Washington Post, you can buy Twitter, and so on and so forth. So, if you, I'm not a Marxist and I'm not a revolutionary, but seriously, I mean, if we if you reduce the wealth of billionaires to like 100 million, okay, let's give them 100 million, right? You're not going to decrease their well-being, right? But you can then put in the United States, you can put this money into infrastructure, which is really crumbling and so on and so forth. Right now, and this is such a self-serving thing to say, and this is what wealthy people say. Oh, you tax us, we leave, But and some of them, I mean, I give it. Elon Musk is a brilliant, right? So if he leaves United States, then that would reduce, economic growth. I'm pretty convinced of that. But in most cases, those billionaires, especially for the financial billionaires, if they leave, it's actually going to make the society better off. All right. So I'm not saying that we should go and do this. I'm not a Leninist here. But let's keep in mind that the wealthy control the media, and they feed us with a lot of bullshit. All right. So let's separate bullshit from reasonable things. Okay. All right.
So, Peter, you'll get a call from Trump tomorrow. So he will make you maybe a secretary of common prosperity in the US.
I refuse. I tell him, give me money to do research so that we can actually inform you how to do it, how to get out of this predicament better.
You may change your mind tomorrow. So when you get the call.
Thank you very much, Professor Turchin, and thank you very much for your presentation. I'm afraid we have to wrap up here, but before we end up, we also want to say that for next Monday, at the same room, same time, we'll have another public lecture by Professor Vishnu Gupta on the economic history of India. So looking forward to see you all again next Monday. Thank you very much. Thank you.